Hello, I'm Charles Minnimatsu. Welcome to this new restoration of John Boggs's long-lost experimental masterpiece, Waxwing Slain. As a former student of Mr. Boggs, I was honored when Cinema Film Archives asked me to provide the commentary for this release, to provide what insight I could, both as a student and a friend. I'm so glad that finally, after suffering the fate of so many artists ignored in their day, I can play a small part in bringing Professor Boggs's groundbreaking, non-narrative work to a wider audience. He would have loved nothing more. So here, we see the film begin with the title card. He would say, if film is a moving museum piece, this is the plaque besides the work. Here we see the title, Waxwing Slain, which Boggs derived from a quote by Shakespeare. Our first image of the film is that most primordial image, light, color and light. Though in all the time we spent together, he never mentioned or expressed admiration for Rothko, my research couldn't help but find parallels between the way the two artists evoked the most powerful emotions with the most basic uses of color, like a sort of proto-primitivism. And while Boggs's work certainly never reached the public acclaim of Rothko, it's hard not to see his own color work influence that of his more famous peers, but we'll touch on that later. Here, in what we'll call the first complex image of the film, is water. Flow is so important to Boggs. Watching wisps of smoke or waving flames, or here, the movement of water. He loved movement. In his final years, when I moved in with him and his wife, we used to watch 12 Legs, the James Benning film. He loved it, and I think he enjoyed seeing how Benning built off his own work. I mean, the influence is obvious here. I think he was always upset that Hollis Frampton stole his idea of water for Zorn's Lima. You know, Boggs was part of the village scene, some of which you'll see here, and was peers with these other guys. His films were screened, I mean rarely, but they were, then consciously or unconsciously stripped for parts. But here you see the artist, untouched, unjaded. You're seeing the person he came so close to being again towards the end, after being held back for so long. From shots of nature, here we get his nature, the village. It's interesting when you think about it, how the old poets, Thoreau and Walden, they made art about nature, but they did that because that was the natural world around them. Guys like Dylan or Warhol or Boggs, their world was neon and Nehru and encroaching commercialism. They had to find the beauty in that world. It's here, for a small sliver, that we get to see Boggs himself, a portrait of the artist as a young man. And for those with a bit more biographical interest, we see his wife, Sybil. I'm not speaking out of school to suggest that they had the kind of marriage so many men of John's time had. Getting married was just the thing you did. You know, what Sybil knew or when, it's hard to say, but she knew at some point, and she got resentful. Classic story. I mean, she probably knew when she saw this, if not before. He always had an admiration for the subtle sensuality of the male form in mid-musculature, the faint outlines of pectorals emerging on an otherwise flat and barren canvas, like when dust hits the air so you can just watch it bend and curl. He never told me if he had male lovers before, but scenes like this suggest as much, even if those lovers, like his marriage, were just experimentations or means to an end, rather than the real partnership he would ultimately find. We were close, and that's how I know. I'm sure by some standards, people just don't understand. There's a mentor element to some situations. Classic story, adopted boy finds father figure. Doesn't mean anybody is being used or anything. And for people of his generation, I don't know if they can ever shake the sense of secrecy or shame. You know, he once said that he thought the only honest scene in narrative cinema was the blowjob scene in Midnight Cowboy. He thought all movies were lies. That's how much he hated having to lie, but the world made him lie in his life. He didn't have to lie in his movies. You could tell the truth with movies. And these cowards didn't get that. You know, I actually offered this print to those people down at the Anthology in New York, and they turned it down. I mean, the supposed epicenter of experimental film founded by Jonas Mekas, who, let's face it, you're watching this too, you can see it. See how much people took from him without giving even a little back, and even now, they just want to leave him out in the cold? Like that legacy means nothing? I'm not going to get into the politics of it. The film speaks for itself. Here we get what seems to be a tribute to old Hollywood. the glamour, the parties, some old silent comedians. For someone his age, so serious, he never lost his sense of humor. In class, I broke a camera lens once for an old Bolex, and he called me Broken Blossom for months. That was it. By the end, he didn't remember that. He used to call me his little Chucky boy. That was his usual name. But when I told him about Broken Blossom, he would just laugh like it was the latest joke on the block. I'll miss that. Oh, here's the moment. When I first saw this in class, 4th row, 3rd seat from the door, I saw this and it was just like a lightning struck moment. I knew he would understand, that I'd found another artist who would understand. That's art. It creates connection. I'm not crazy. Whatever she thought, I'm not crazy. It's there. When it got to this part and he told us from the back of the room, he shouted that this clip came from a film called Black Man's Son, I'm like, that's me. I knew in that moment, I felt it in that moment, that's me. He's talking about me. Not that he knew it was me at the time. I'm not crazy. I wasn't even born when he made this film, but it's there. Cosmically, it's there in the fabric of it all, just calling out, So I saw this and I had to tell him. I had to talk to him and tell him because I knew he would understand. So I went to his office during office hours. I went to his office, which was in the broom closet, if you can believe that. They shoved him in a broom closet. This great artist in a broom closet, which isn't much better than where Sybil fucking had him. But I went there and I told him he'd know. He'd know like I know. I knew I wasn't just some Japanese street strafe, some fat white Connecticut couple plucked up out of the gutter. I always knew there was something, So I did some digging as I grew up to find what would fill in the blanks. I knew I always loved movies. And I remember being a kid and renting Three Ninjas. Now, I know. You don't come to an experimental film screening to hear about Three Ninjas. But here's where it gets interesting, okay? The director of Three Ninjas was a director named Shin Sang-ok. He was a Korean filmmaker. He made movies in South Korea, was married to a woman who was an actress. They made art together. That's how it should be, right? That's how people thrive. The wife shouldn't be locking you away, holding you back. They were together. And then they got divorced. But then, overnight, they were kidnapped, smuggled to North Korea, and they were forced back together again to make films for this secret kingdom of a society. And their most famous film together was about a blacksmith who made a creature who would become a hero who would save the day. You get it? That's me. I knew it. It felt right. They were my parents. They had me when they were there, but the government must have known a baby would get in the way of their work, so I was smuggled out into Japan and then adopted, and that's how I got here. I'm not mad. I understand. I'm not mad. Things had to be done in the name of art. Sacrifices have to be made. And I knew he'd get that. So I told him all this. Who I was, who I knew I was, what I had in me, and all the while I watched him as he watched me. I watched his hands weave like a web while he listened. Those hands. Oh, wiry from age, but the hands of a craftsman, an artisan. I knew he would understand that I had that moment in that room to show him that we could have that connection, that building block way of elevating each other's art like great artists can, like my parents did. I knew he'd understand. You know who didn't understand? Sybil. I know, big surprise. I get it. She wasn't the person to understand his work. Some people can't get it. They aren't capable. They're just not capable. I'm sure there are some people who are going to be watching this now and just not get it. Obviously, there were plenty of people in 1968 who didn't get it, or who didn't want to get it, or pretended not to get it, who just took from it. You know who. He never got a shot because these guys saw something special and left it in the dust to be copied and cannibalized to bolster their own careers so they could be housed in the Met while he sat in a shitty little college with only one person there who loved him. And Sybil took too. You see a woman who pays the bills and always think the man is the leech, but she let him starve. Sure, his plate was always full, but his heart was always empty. She forced him to take that teaching job, to give up creating, which she can try and fight back fate all she wants. I made it just in time. Met him just in time to fight one last fight for his work. She never cared about it. She let these little film cans just rot up in the attic the same way that she just let him rot in front of a TV after he retired. That's why I went there, to help him, to make sure he got his stimulation, to keep his mind sharp, his work alive. She didn't care. That's why. Why shouldn't we care that the bitch even died, she was in the way. She was just stopping art from being made. She was hurting all of us. Art itself is hostage. If you were standing there and somebody had a gun to your head and I shot them, would you be upset about the loss of life? Would you weep for the poor person ready to take you prisoner? No, of course not. You'd be grateful. You'd thank me for saving you. I rescued you. I mean, look at this. Look at what you're getting to see. You would have never seen this. It would have been rotting away, just like John, because she didn't understand what was there. If she would have stayed alive a minute longer, think what would have been lost. I'm sorry, I just don't even know why it's an issue, why anyone is still bothering it. I mean, look for the good, you know? Look for the good. In the end, I really thought we could make one last thing. I really hoped he could revive his legacy, that I could help him be seen. Now that Sybil was out of the way, I mean, that's why I made Cinema Film Archives in the first place, to revive his work, bring him to the people, you people, for you to see him, to understand. But he couldn't do it. He didn't care. His heart wasn't in it. That big, beautiful heart I knew was gone. The spark, the magic, she had made him so hollow, so empty, so dependent on her that he couldn't think of anything else. He kept asking where she was. I was talking about screenings, restorations. He wouldn't listen. I tried telling him maybe she had to die so his art could live. He hated that. Isn't that sad? He couldn't see it. I mean, you see it. You're watching this, you see it too, right? Think about it. A few silly little heartbeats almost had the power to hold back art. You would have never gotten this. So, I mean, in the end, he was barely John anyway. The man who made this was gone. He certainly wasn't going to make anything else like it. I mean, when the Nazis are burning down buildings and shooting people in the street, you don't try and save one life. You save art. His final moments were in the bathtub. I knew he always loved the water. I know it's hard to believe when you're looking at the work of a vibrant young artist, but now he was so tired. You felt it in his soul. He barely tried to fight it. He barely gasped for air. A few bubbles rising to the surface, making ripples in the water, until that was the only movement. He loved movement. Don't be sad. Don't be sad. Art is more than just one person, and that's what makes film so special. It's not just one painter or one author or one voice. Film is a collaboration, connection, many people, many voices, and you hope for harmony. And a lot of people think that the director is the conductor, but he's not. Boggs knew that. He told us in class, and I've never forgotten it. He said, the camera only captures life for a moment. It's the editor who can snuff it out or craft immortality. Thank you so much for joining me for this important restoration. It took so much to bring it to you, but in the end, it was worth it.